I still remember the smell of burnt coffee and floor polish from that morning. Launch day. I had barely slept the night before. Final tweaks, final approvals, final everything. But when I walked into the office that Thursday at 6:45 a.m., I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Pride. My name is Gary Ross. I'm 43 years old, and until that day, I was the director of product development at a mid-sized logistics tech firm. The kind of company that starts in a garage and grows into something respectable. Not flashy, not viral, just solid. I'd been there since the Series A funding. Since before they had investors. Before they had structure. I was there when the founder, Tom Weber, still wrote code himself and joked about building something too boring for Silicon Valley to steal. We were launching our most ambitious software platform yet, a full-stack inventory automation solution with real-time syncing, predictive analytics, and a sleek new client dashboard. Took us nearly 18 months to build. I led the team. I designed the architecture. I even patched up the broken server migration mid-sprint, on my own time, because we couldn't afford another delay. The launch was mine, but it had his name on it. Weber Sync, after the founder's last name, his legacy, his son's future. By 9 a.m., the dashboard was live. Press releases were out. Our client onboarding webinars were queued. And I stood by the main conference screen as the front-end engineer triple-checked uptime stats. Everything was green. Everything was perfect. I watched Tom walk in, suited, unusually polished. Behind him, Jason Weber, his son. 29 years old, fresh MBA. Barely 6 months with the company. Shadowing, mostly. Sitting in meetings, asking questions he didn't understand. Everyone knew he was next in line, even if no one said it aloud. Tom shook my hand like always, firm, professional, grateful. "You pulled it off," he said. "Really, Gary, this is a defining moment for us." "Appreciate that," I replied, managing a tired smile. "Let's see if the servers hold up after lunch." I noticed the flicker in Jason's eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't say congratulations, just a nod, almost like he wanted to be somewhere else. Then Tom glanced at his watch and said something that immediately shifted the tone in the room. "Gary, mind stepping into the main conference room with us? Just a quick strategic chat before the rollout call." I didn't think anything of it. Probably a realignment talk, maybe client prioritization, normal post-launch stuff. But the moment I stepped into the room and saw HR sitting there, clipboard out, tight-lipped, I knew. There were no handshakes this time. No "great job." Just a statement from the HR rep I barely knew. "We're restructuring leadership in the product division. Effective immediately, your position has been dissolved." I blinked, thought it was a joke. I actually looked at Tom. And all he did was lower his gaze and nod, like this was some unspoken agreement we had made. Jason stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching like a man trying to look calm while holding in a smirk. I asked, "Is this a performance issue?" "No," HR replied. "This isn't punitive. It's strategic. You've helped build something remarkable, and we believe it's now in a position to scale under a more agile framework." "Agile," I repeated, letting the words sit in the air. "You're replacing me with Jason." Tom flinched. "We're elevating Jason to interim leadership as part of our succession plan, yes." I laughed. I couldn't help it. I didn't say anything cruel. I didn't flip the table or shout or storm out. I just sat there for a moment and let the silence wrap around me like a second skin. Then I stood up, nodded, and walked out. Back to my office. Past the engineers still celebrating. Past the Slack channel pinging with emojis and praise. Past the email from our largest client thanking us for the smoothest launch they'd ever seen. I walked in, shut the door, and exhaled. Jason thought launch day was his beginning. He didn't know what I built into the foundation. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my office, maybe an hour, maybe more, just staring at the Slack channels blowing up with launch praise. People congratulating the team, thanking Jason Weber for his visionary direction, calling it the smoothest rollout in company history. My name was already gone, wiped clean. I hadn't even cleared out my coffee mug. HR said they'd arrange for my things to be delivered, a courier, like I was a broken keyboard someone tossed in a box. I didn't argue, didn't ask for a timeline. I just shut my laptop and let the silence settle in. But before I logged out for good, I paused. There were admin tools, legacy dashboards I'd built back when the company was scrappy and rules didn't exist. Tools they never migrated off of. Systems no one documented, because no one else even knew how they worked. I didn't delete anything. I didn't change any permissions. I just left them untouched, quiet, dormant, watching. I left through the side exit to avoid small talk, got in my car, drove without thinking. Past the main intersection, past the cheap sandwich place Jason always bragged about. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and sat there for almost an hour, engine off, keys in hand, just breathing. What hit hardest wasn't losing the title. It wasn't the paycheck. It was the realization that 18 months of blood, caffeine, and precision had been stripped away in a sentence. We're going in a new direction. Jason's direction, which meant shortcuts, shiny reports, and shallow confidence. He had no roadmap. He didn't even know the backup server names. But they handed him my legacy like it was a gift basket. By the next morning, I was still in limbo. I hadn't told anyone outside the company yet. I hadn't even told my sister. But my phone, it was full. Missed calls, Slack pings, a couple of vendors asking about timelines. One client, our largest medical supplier, emailed asking about a data sync issue in the pre-launch sandbox. They'd tried reaching Jason. No reply. I didn't answer either. Not yet. Let them sweat. That same afternoon I checked the internal dashboard, not the sanitized company front end. The real one, buried deep in the infrastructure I had personally assembled. API errors, 3 failed sync attempts, and someone, Jason, I assumed, had tried to manually override a deprecated module, which, by the way, hadn't been used since Q4 last year. The guy didn't even know it had been retired. I knew then that I didn't need to sabotage anything. The system would do it for me. And sure enough, on day 3, Jason published a full company-wide Slack post. Weber Sync launch. What's next? All caps. All fluff. He took credit for everything. Used buzzwords like disruption and market readiness. Even claimed he streamlined the backend. I built that backend. Every line of it. He didn't even know how to reset the failover sequence. There was one bullet point that stood out. Legacy modules scheduled for purge. He listed timestamps, and one of them was wrong. Dangerously wrong. That legacy module still connected to 3 live vendors, including one hospital's temperature-controlled shipment tracker. I didn't fix it. I just logged out. And for the first time in years, I slept like a rock. I didn't just build Weber Sync. I built the company's digital nervous system. Every department's workflow, every vendor integration, every back-end rule was something I either wrote, tested, or approved. It wasn't a matter of ego, it was necessity. In the early days, we couldn't afford silos. If something broke, you fixed it yourself. If data didn't move fast enough, you rewrote the pipes. I got used to solving problems before people even noticed they existed. Jason had walked into a world where everything already worked. He never learned where those wires ran or how tightly they were coiled. That was the difference. He thought software just ran because someone clicked the deploy button. But code doesn't work like that. Infrastructure is a living thing. And when you neglect it, or worse, poke at it with no idea what you're doing, it fights back. I knew which parts of the system were fragile. Not because they were broken, but because they were critical. Built to handle pressure, yes, but only under the right conditions. Our entire alerting system, for example, was tiered through cascading logic, not brute force. If a batch processing job failed upstream, it wouldn't throw an error right away. It would wait, attempt to retry, evaluate 2 separate fallback protocols, then escalate it to Slack in a specific channel only I had set up. Jason never even noticed it existed. Not once. One of the most overlooked components was the internal credit token system, something I had quietly layered into our vendor invoice scheduling. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't in any documentation Jason ever saw. But it made sure client usage matched billing frequency during server scaling periods. Without it, invoices drifted. Margins got weird. Clients got double billed, or worse, missed. And the worst part? That system wasn't broken. It was perfect if you knew how to read the logs. But Jason, in his infinite confidence, had recently pushed for a visual analytics only rule, said no one should be wasting time parsing logs. When there were dashboards now. Dashboards he didn't know were only 60% live data and 40% cleverly masked filler to avoid load strain. I designed them that way to protect performance during traffic spikes. But to Jason, they looked clean, fast, foolproof. So when our top-tier SaaS clients started seeing billing anomalies and wrote in with a few questions, I watched quietly as Jason handed off their ticket to an intern, a kid who didn't even know what API versioning meant. He told the client, "We're looking into it," and set the issue to low priority. I didn't touch anything. I didn't interfere. I just logged in, checked the silent alerting channel, and saw 4 escalations in the last 48 hours. Jason hadn't acknowledged a single one. And now the ticking had started. The most poetic part of all of this was something Jason never even asked about, the dry run protocol. Every 2 weeks for the past year, I'd run silent dry runs on all core systems, not just deployment checks, full scenario testing, downtime simulations, account reconciliation, load redistribution. I had set it all up through scheduled scripts using a virtual service account I never documented. Not because I was hiding it, but because it was mine. My last line of quality control, and on the week of launch I had disabled it, not out of spite, out of principle. If they wanted to run this company without me, they'd run it without the tools I'd personally carried on my back. Jason didn't notice the missing dry run cycle, but the system did. Vendor syncs lagged by 12 hours, unnoticed. A payment scheduler retried a failed invoice 3 times, violating terms we had with a procurement partner. The system didn't fail catastrophically, it just began to slowly erode. The kind of erosion only visible to someone who knew what normal looked like. Meanwhile, I waited, quiet, patient. This wasn't revenge, this was inevitability. It started with a help desk ticket, just one. A supplier in Michigan flagged a shipping delay tied to a misfired invoice, the kind that used to be auto-corrected by my failover logic, but no one noticed it in time. The internal SLA lapsed. The client wasn't furious, not yet, just disappointed. That was the word they used. Meanwhile, another client, this one in pharmaceuticals, noticed their platform analytics were stuck at 78% for over 48 hours. It wasn't a display bug. The real-time data connector had silently failed 2 days earlier. The retry logic had been disabled likely by Jason, who assumed it was unnecessary redundancy. He wanted a cleaner dev environment. He got one, stripped, silent, and brittle. Jason didn't panic. He postured. He called a team-wide meeting and spoke about temporary latency, said everything was under control, thanked everyone for their patience. But I knew the look in his eyes, that jitter under the confident tone, the realization that he didn't know how deep the rot had spread. Because the thing about systems like Weber Sync, they don't scream when they break. They whisper. Gently, consistently, until everything under the surface buckles at once, and it was about to buckle. The following week, the sales team started complaining. Their CRM sync was glitching. New leads weren't registering correctly, causing double follow-ups or complete misses. Marketing data pipelines were off by 8 to 12 hours. The finance department flagged unprocessed vendor fees that had bounced back due to outdated routing logic. That one stung, because it triggered an internal audit automatic, algorithmic, and indiscriminate. I had built that audit tool 3 years ago, mostly as a safeguard for compliance. It was meant to run quietly every Sunday night, cross-referencing financial outputs with vendor contracts and invoicing history. But Jason didn't know how to read the logs, or worse, didn't even know the tool existed, so when it went off, it triggered a full diagnostic dump one that got flagged by the CFO's assistant, who then escalated it directly to the board. Now they had a pattern. Failure wasn't anecdotal anymore, it was systemic. Jason called another meeting, smaller this time, just engineering and ops. He asked vague questions about sync errors and server response times. He talked about API stability. He tried to sound in control. But the questions he asked? They gave him away. He didn't understand what a reverse timestamp inconsistency was. He didn't know what rollbacks did to our vendor pricing matrix. He was a tourist in the house I built, and now it was falling apart around him. I kept waiting for Tom the founder to step in, to fix it, but he didn't, not at first. He was out of town. Investor roadshows, fundraising meetings, smiling in LinkedIn posts about how Weber Sync is scaling beautifully thanks to a strong leadership handoff. Ironic, because while he was posting that, the system was eating itself alive. Jason made one last mistake. He tried to restore an older config file to stabilize billing after one particularly bad vendor escalation. He didn't run it in a sandbox, he didn't validate the checksum. He just uploaded and deployed it directly into production. The config was from 7 months ago, before the new pricing rules, before the modified billing logic. In a single move, Jason undid 6 months of logic patches. In 18 hours, our payment system issued refunds, duplicate charges, and invalidated 4 major partner agreements. That was the breakpoint. The founder flew back early. The next morning, the entire company got an email. Internal system review underway. Please refrain from publishing updates or making major changes to back-end services. It didn't come from Jason. It came from Tom. Jason didn't show up that day. Word spread that he had stepped back temporarily. Meanwhile, engineers worked overnight to identify what went wrong. They couldn't find a root exploit. There wasn't one. No sabotage. No breach. Just negligence. Pride. And silence where oversight used to be. Tom sent me a message that night. Short. Just 4 words. Can we talk tomorrow? I stared at it for a full minute. Then I powered off my phone. Let them sit in it. I didn't build a trap. I just took my hands off the wheel. And they never learned how to drive. The investigation lasted 8 days. Not criminal internal. But it felt like a crime scene. Teams were pulled into audit interviews. Logs were examined. Emails combed through. Every single developer who touched billing in the past 6 months was brought into a conference room with a notepad and a glass of corporate-branded water. It was procedural theater, but Tom wasn't playing around. He wanted answers, not excuses. They found nothing malicious. No one could trace a line of sabotage, no code injection, no external IPs, just a string of bad decisions and blind deployments. And then, inevitably, Jason's name came up. His override logs, his Slack directives, his timestamps not matching his claims. One junior engineer even admitted he'd voiced concern, but was told to focus on what matters, not ancient back-end crap. That line made it into the report. Word for word. Gary's name, my name, never showed up in the system access logs. Not once during the crash window. I had scrubbed my access clean the day I left. They knew it too. Someone in legal phrased it like, he left without interfering, but in hindsight, we see where critical dependencies existed on his undocumented systems. That was their way of saying, we fired the wrong guy, and now we know it, but we can't say it out loud. Vendors were furious. 3 long-term partners paused contracts pending a review. One client issued a breach of service fine. Internally, the whispers started. Even employees who once called Jason visionary started scrubbing their LinkedIn profiles of the term. Engineers posted vague job-hunting tweets. The mood shifted. The fear Jason brought was gone, replaced by unease. No one wanted to be next in line for blame. I spent that week in silence. No responses to texts, no leaked tips, just long walks. Books I hadn't finished. Rebuilding my sleep schedule. It was strange, feeling peace while a storm I once lived inside was finally consuming itself. A few former co-workers reached out not to gossip, but to say sorry. They didn't know what to believe when I was let go. Now they did. That mattered more than the paychecks. On the 9th day, an email landed in my inbox from a recruiter. Subject line: New Infrastructure Director Opportunity Confidential. I clicked it, curious. It wasn't just any role. It was with one of our oldest competitors. They'd been watching the chaos unfold and knew exactly who had built WeberSync and who hadn't. A few hours later, I got another message. This time from Tom himself. Director, no assistant, no BCCs. Just, I made a mistake. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I didn't reply. Not to be petty, but because that's what Jason never understood. Systems are built on more than code. They're built on trust, intuition, quiet work no one claps for. You don't replace that by bloodline. You earn it. And when you throw it away, well, sometimes the system runs just long enough for you to realize who really held it together. Tom eventually released a company-wide statement polished, diplomatic, carefully avoiding the word failure. He called it a leadership misalignment during a critical growth phase. He never mentioned Jason by name, but everyone knew. The internal portal's About page was quietly updated. Jason's title disappeared. The founder's son, erased by the system he thought he understood. A few employees sent around screenshots of it like urban legends. The story had already become lore, the launch that imploded, and beneath all that noise, one truth emerged. The guy who held it together was never in the photos. I took the job offer from the competitor, not out of spite, but because they asked better questions. The first meeting wasn't about compensation. It was about infrastructure philosophy, how I thought systems should fail, how alerts should breathe, how culture flows through code. They didn't want a plug-and-play executive. They wanted a builder, someone who understood silence as much as syntax. And I knew then this time I'd build it with guardrails. Not for them. For me. So no one could quietly remove the foundation again and pretend it never mattered. Some stories end with applause. Mine ended with a Slack notification and a login page I never visited again. I never went back. Not even once. Not to collect old photos. Not to grab coffee with anyone still inside. When people leave quietly, they often hope the door will open again one day. I didn't. I locked mine from the outside, tossed the key, and watched the building from a distance, not out of bitterness, just clarity. Systems don't collapse when the wrong person takes over. They collapse when everyone pretends it doesn't matter. Jason was a symptom, not a cause. The real cause was the culture Tom let fester under the surface, a culture that believed genius could be inherited, that decisions were transferable like stock options. They wanted the illusion of stability without the discipline of it. Jason smiled in meetings, said the right words, took selfies at launch. But the work, the quiet behind-the-scenes architecture that made everything hum, that was me. And they never saw it until it failed in silence. The irony was, I had no grand plan, no sabotage, no clever virus ticking under the surface. I didn't even adjust a setting on my way out. I just let things be. That was enough. Because a good system is like gravity, reliable, invisible, constant. But tamper with the wrong lever, and even gravity stops being friendly. Jason pulled too many levers without knowing what they did, and when it all started to tilt, he looked around for a manual that never existed, because I was the manual. I had spent 18 months writing line after line, creating redundancy loops, fallback conditions, conditional alerts, and audit trails no one ever thanked me for. They were boring, unseen. They weren't on dashboards or investor decks, but they worked. Until someone like Jason came along and thought, why do we need all this? And like most people who inherit well-oiled machines, he assumed simplicity meant ease. It didn't. It meant engineering. The real punchline came weeks after the dust settled. A mutual friend, someone still in the Oppius team, forwarded me an internal memo from the board. They were conducting a full review of legacy dependencies and untracked engineering assets. The tone was careful, almost academic, but in between the lines I saw it. Fear. The board finally understood that Jason hadn't taken the wheel. He'd climbed into a moving car, hit the gas, and yanked out the brakes to make it go faster. And now? Now they wanted to know what else had been built, without them knowing. My friend asked if I was tempted to go back. No, I said, but I'll watch how they fix what they broke. There was one more message from Tom. He sent it late one night, weeks after his initial apology. It wasn't long, just 2 paragraphs. He admitted he'd been arrogant, said he confused vision with oversight. He didn't ask me to return. He didn't offer a title or a salary or a redemption arc. He just said this. We built something good once, and I let it get handled by someone who didn't understand the weight of it. I won't make that mistake again. I hope, wherever you are, you're building something better. That was the closest thing to closure I needed. Because here's the truth. Legacies aren't what people say about you at the launch party. They're what holds up after you're gone. And if yours collapses the minute you leave the room, then it was never really yours to begin with. These days, I don't talk about WeberSync much. Not in interviews, not at conferences. I let the rumors circulate. People know my name now, not because I demanded it, but because failure taught them who had value. The company I joined after, they didn't ask for miracles. They asked for patience. Systems built with breathing room. Logs that tell the truth, even when the dashboards lie. We move slower, but when something breaks, it doesn't take us with it. I mentor now. Younger engineers. People like I once was sitting in cramped server rooms, wondering if what they're building matters. I tell them the same thing every time. Build like someone will one day try to run it without you. Because they will. And when they do, let them find out what you already knew.